Good afternoon, I'm Francheska Obias, and Nieva and I will tackle about the feminist analysis of popular culture. There are three parts in the feminist analysis of popular culture. First is feminism and mass culture, which includes Modleski, Anne Douglas, Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the terms used. Then, feminism theory and critique of content analysis, which includes Van Zunen, critique of content analysis, Baer, and Muir. And for the feminist theory, patriarchy, and psychoanalysis, we have liberal feminist, Baer, feminist analysis, Hartman, psychoanalytic theory, radical feminism, and socialist feminism. The proponents mentioned here are Jean Muir, Carol Ann Douglas, Amy R. Baer, Van Zunen, and Tanya Modleski. So, feminism and mass culture. First, we're going to talk about Modleski's account of the relationship between gender and mass culture. She says it is radical because it goes beyond saying women have been annihilated by popular culture and cultural studies to question the very language and assumptions in terms of which popular culture has been assessed. The general point is that gender has a fundamental relevance for the concept of mass culture and for the study of popular culture. Modleski's argument is highly critical of the view that gender is merely another aspect which needs to be included to make the picture of popular culture more complete and representative than it has been before. For her, it goes much deeper. According to Modleski, our ways of thinking and feeling about mass culture are so intricately bound up with the notions of the feminine that the need for a feminist critique becomes obvious at every level of the debate. The work of 19th century women writers is inferior to that of their male contemporaries, and that women writers were responsible for the emergence of mass culture. Her concern is that women have been held responsible for mass culture and its harmful effects, while men are privileged to have the responsibility for high culture or art, since mass culture is identified with femininity and high culture with masculinity. Anne Douglas put forward Modleski's thoughts about feminism and mass culture. She is writing about Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. So according to Stowe, Little Eva and the Victorian scenes, objects, and sensibility is the introduction to consumerism. It has provided historical and practical preparation for the equally indispensable and disquieting comforts of mass culture. In the novel, Little Eva laments the existence of slavery and sees no difference between blacks and whites. Some even says that the novel has helped to shape and mold equality for women as we know it today. According to Modleski, the argument Douglas and others have provided the historical preparation for the practice of countless critics who persist in equating femininity, consumption and reading on the one hand, and masculinity, production and writing on the other. This equally exposes the masculinist bias of much politically oriented criticism that adopts metaphors of production and consumption in order to differentiate between progressive and regressive activities of reading or viewing as the case may be. According to Modleski, the point should be to find out why consumption should be the concern of women within patriarchal societies, rather than blaming them for the rise of consumerism. It is not merely a question of adding in gender as another feature of popular culture, but of understanding and challenging the hierarchy of categories which elevates the masculine and subordinates the feminine in examining popular culture. Modleski shows how the very terms used to assess mass culture and define its inferiority to high culture are derived from and refer back to the sexist constructions of femininity and masculinity in the wider society. Here we can see high culture or art is associated with masculinity, production, work, intellect, activity, and writing. However, mass culture or popular culture is associated with femininity, consumption, leisure, emotion, passivity, and reading. Thus, for example, The fear expressed by high culture critics about how audiences are made passive, vulnerable, and prone to consumerism by mass culture is equally a fear about how audiences are becoming feminine, which suggests, for Modleski, how central gender is to our understanding of popular culture. So now we go to feminist theory and the critique of content analysis. So the key problem identified here is that mass media should reflect reality of women's lives in a society which does not confer the same privileges upon women as it does upon men. So Van Zunen identifies feminism as liberal feminism, which sees legislation and increased equality of opportunity as ways of undermining the unrealistic portrayal of women in popular culture. Van Zunen refers us to radical and socialist feminist perspectives as well as what she sees as a cultural studies feminist approach, which all argue that societies like our own are endemically sexist since they are rooted in patriarchal relations, and that remedial actions, such as equal opportunities legislation, can at best only influence things at the margins. The media are not simply being devious in showing women in stereotypical roles but have a far more basic role in helping to define and shape the fundamental meanings of femininity and masculinity. These are not identities which clearly exist elsewhere and then come to be distorted by popular culture. They are, in part at least, constructed and reproduced through popular culture by mass media institutions. Liberal feminism fails to appreciate these points because it is atheoretical. It neglects the wider structures of patriarchal power and sticks to the findings unearthed by the content analysis. An important prerequisite for the development of alternative feminist theories has therefore been the critique of content analysis. The basic assumption of content analysis is that there is a relation between the frequency with which a certain item appears in a text or ad and the interest or intentions of the producer and the responses of the audience. What the text is all about or what the producer means by the text is hidden in it and can be revealed by identifying and counting significant textual features. Content analysis is usually confined to a large scale, objective, and systematic surveys of manifest content using the counting of content items as the basis for later interpretation. A number of feminist writers have been highly critical of this use of content analysis. These writers do not deny altogether its validity or the value of its findings but are concerned to make its limitations clear. The first criticism to content analysis is that it is theoretical. It is claimed that content analysis is theoretical because it is not linked to an explanatory theoretical framework. Instead, it is treated uncritically as a quantitative research method. It is similarly thought to be theoretical since it does not have an explanation of the relationship between the popular cultural text being analyzed and the social structural context, including the underlying power relations in which it can be located. According to Baer, studies which describe sexist content cannot help us to understand the relationship between the content described and the social structures which produce it and within which it operates. The absence of theory is also evident in the way content analysis is said to emphasize the quantity at the expense of quality, though it is not completely true. For example, the study of television advertisements by Cumberbatch. They were able to discriminate between the quantitative fact of more men than women being portrayed cooking and the qualitative fact that this cooking was shown to be a skilled accomplishment for special occasions. Nonetheless, content analysis does concentrate upon the differing numbers of men and women represented performing particular roles rather than asking questions about how and why representations occur. The lack of qualitative discrimination is bound up with the failure of studies using content analysis to distinguish between different levels of meaning. This criticism owes much to other theories such as semiology and Marxism, which argue that there are covert or hidden levels of meaning which lie behind and give rise to the overt or superficial meanings which content analysis deals with. The contrast between a quantitative method and the study of overt meanings on the one hand, which is content analysis, and the qualitative method and the study of covert meanings on the other, which is semiology or structuralist analysis, is brought out well by Baer. For this, Baer gave an example. So, one woman newsreader reporting an item on militant bra-burning feminists numerically equals one woman newsreader reporting on feminist reasonable case for abortion on demand. The method enumerates the visible form, which is both newsreaders are women, but leaves out the important questions and the difference in the content presented. It suggests that content analysis as a methodology implicitly influences the kind of questions asked, and that the conclusions it draws may work against feminist interests. This more qualitative evaluation of news reading and female representations, informed by theories which stress the basic importance of covert meanings, rests upon a critique of content analysis, its politics, and its research agenda. Not all feminists share Bayer's position. Muir argues, for example, that recent feminist debates have used psychoanalytic theory to explore why the male gaze is dominant in mainstream cinema. But there may be a more concrete, if related explanation, which is that masculine point of view is prevalent simply because men control the industry. Content analysis can therefore be mobilized to support this position by quantifying the prevalence of the masculine point of view in popular culture, just as other types of statistical evidence can identify male control over the media industries. The feminist critique of content analysis has gone on to claim that it can only, at best, provide a static picture of social and gender relations and of representations of women and men. Content analysis can give some idea of what gender representations look like at particular points in time, but it cannot be more descriptive. It is not explanatory and cannot answer questions such as where do cultural representations come from? How do different types of representations in various areas of the media fit together? And how and why do representations change over time? Without some kind of theory, it is difficult to answer these questions. Content analysis rests upon the claims that media representations are coherent and uniform, not ambiguous or contradictory, and that the sex role stereotypes presented by the media are clear and consistent, not complex and open to varying interpretations. Content analysis also argues it is objective, though it relies upon categories it has defined to study media text. These therefore may not be as objective as its claim. For example, they may embody certain theoretical or political presuppositions which supports its more general orientation, but which, since they remain implicit and unstated, it cannot be open to argument. The choice of the categories with which content analysis works involves theoretical and political decisions. If these were made to be apparent, they would often undermine the claims made to objectivity. And last, as we have seen in the discussion of women and advertising, content analysis is ill equipped to understand those instances in which popular media culture attempts to incorporate feminism or to recognize the use of feminist arguments for purposes which are at odds with the interests of feminism.
Okay, so before I start, I am Nieva and I will discuss the third feminist analysis of popular culture, which is feminist theory, patriarchy, and psychoanalysis. Okay, so for the liberal feminists, in their viewpoint, it sees mass media as to having the capacity to reflect the reality of women's lives in patriarchal capitalist societies. Because in this society, we women are oppressed and objectified by men. So this is something important to the liberal feminists, so they clearly examined this viewpoint through content analysis methodology. So this methodology shows the cultural representations of women. For example, in advertising, they distort the reality of women's lives, portraying a fantasy world rather than the one women who actually live in. But as we have noted, feminists have questioned this view by asking who is to define the objective reality the media have to represent. Because there are some stereotypes which have their social equivalents or at least elements of them in the real world. Um, Example nito is yung mga advertisers that aim their products at women because they are thought to be the main consumers of this type of certain products. That is why you mostly see in advertisement of beauty products that women are hugely represented. This is because media pervade female characters as someone who devotes much of their time to improving their appearances. And also, they have criticized the contention or the conflict that cultural representations must either be real or unreal. Considering one of ABS-CBN's longest running morning shows, Be Careful with My Heart, which tells the story of Maya, portrayed by Jody Santa Maria, who is working as a nanny to Sir Chief's 3 children. This is in exchange, so she will get the help she needs to fulfill her dreams of becoming a flight stewardess. So along the way, you can see how liberal feminists continue to question gender balance as to how women are portrayed by media. So the representations of women also in soap operas might be difficult to understand if they are thought to be purely fictitious. That is why people love this show, because of the audience who continually support the stereotype roles. There is an important difference between theories behind methodological and analytical assumptions. So, there are theories which take for granted the media's ability to reflect reality, if ideological distortions are removed, and theories which see the media and popular culture as to having a crucial part in constructing reality. So, as we have seen, for example, in semiology, it does not necessarily deny that an objective reality exists, but it does insist that our knowledge of it is derived culturally by such things as language. Like what feminist theorists attempt to reclaim and redefine. They try to structure language for women, like some of them find comfort in changing titles of unisex jobs. For example, police officer versus policeman, or mail carrier versus mailman. Okay? So for this feminist theory, reality cannot be taken for granted, but it has to be understood as something that is culturally and ideologically constructed. It has therefore to be analyzed by different theoretical perspectives drawn from structuralism, psychoanalysis, and Marxism, and by more adequate concepts such as patriarchy, which I will discuss later. Okay, so you already know Bayer as one of the proponents of this theory. So Bayer responded critically to the cultural representations of the liberated woman and provided a succinct summary of these points. So she said that the fact that heroic women have supplemented heroic men on the screen involves us in more than just media headcounting. So the media, according to her, is not transparent. They do not and cannot directly reflect the real world any more than language can. So to argue that they do is to deny the whole process of mediation, which comprises a set of structures and practices which produce an ideological effect on the material they organize. Okay, so an evident example are the heroes you have watched on television shows where most of them are male-dominated, diba? So this is because media continue to represent both women and men in stereotype ways that limit our perceptions of human possibilities. Typically, men are portrayed as active, adventurous, powerful, aggressive, and largely uninvolved in human relationships. Women, on the other hand, are portrayed as significantly younger and thinner than women in the population as a whole, and most are depicted as passive, dependent on men, and entangled in relationships or housework. So she further added that media determine and directly affect how women see themselves and how they behave as women in society. So for example is yung dependence of women on the independence of men. You can see here sa picture that Walt Disney's award-winning animated film, The Little Mermaid, vividly embodies females' dependence on males for identity. So in this feature film, the mermaid quite literally gives up her identity as a mermaid in order to become acceptable to her human lover. So in this children's story, we see a particularly obvious illustration of the asymmetrical relationship between women and men that is more conveyed in other media productions. Another picture here is the Smurfs, who are the blue formless little beings who have no obvious sex. This reflects the male to female, dominant to submissive roles. So here, the female Smurf, unlike her male companion, who have names, is called only Smurfette. Okay, so making her role, her sole identity, a diminutive relation to male Smurfs. The male dominance or female subservience pattern permeates these representations to mass audience. So this approach mistakes the relationship between the media and their users as an unusual one. So it is not the media in themselves that determine what women are. Sabi ni Bayer. So she also said that women are not only determined by media, they may also be constructed outside the media as well. And it is their marginality in culture and in the media which contributes to their subordinated positions. That is why, di ba, parang pinagkaita ng media ang presentation of women for the past years. Some have consistent cultural views of women depicting them as young, thin, beautiful, passive, and often dependent. Okay? So society perceive female characters to devoting their primary energies to improving their appearances and taking care of homes and people. Because media pervade their lives, the way they misrepresent genders that distort how we see them and what we perceive as normal and desirable. So instead, attention needs to be given to the vital questions which explore the relationship between women's subordination in terms of their economic place in patriarchal relations under capitalism, and also the representation of those relations in the ideological domain. This feminist analysis has developed a number of theoretical ideas, like yung concept of patriarchy, that describes a social relationship in which men dominate, exploit, and oppress women. So here, the unequal relations between the genders is defined, although it recognizes that not all men or all women are equally advantaged or disadvantaged. But there is still other structures of inequality it recognizes, such as yung class, race, which are also relevant. So Hartman defined patriarchy as a set of social relations between men which have a material base. This enables it to establish or create interdependence and solidarity among men that enable them to dominate women. So for Hartman, patriarchy has an unequal power to the relationship between men and women, which is very important in determining how women and men will be represented in popular culture and how they will respond to those representations. Patriarchy clearly has a wider point of reference than this, and there is some debate about how it should be defined and how important it is. But viewing it in the way we have helps to clarify its role in the feminist analysis of the media and popular culture. One example of the role it has played in the development of feminist theory and analysis is its use of psychoanalytic theory. So this is to analyze how and why men look at female representations in contemporary popular culture. And also to assess na rin yung meaning of this power men have over women. So this argument is particularly defined with the work of Mulvey in the year 1975. So it is summarized by Gaman and Marshment, and according to their summary, that Mulvey's thesis states that visual pleasure in mainstream Hollywood cinema comes from and reproduces a structure whereby the spectator is invited to identify with a male gaze at an objectified female. So when we say gaze, it is a term that describes how viewers engage with visual media. Diba dito, sinabi na the spectator is invited to identify with a male gaze at an objectified female. Okay, so this invokes a sexualized way of looking because in the male gaze, woman is visually positioned as an object of heterosexual male desire. Yung her feelings, thoughts, and also her sexual drives are less important than her being framed by male desire. So this replicates the structure of unequal power relations between men and women And this pleasure, she concludes, must be disrupted in order to facilitate a feminist cinema. However, Mulvey herself in the year 1981, ni-revise niya yung kanyang argument in light of the criticisms that had occurred. So it ignores kasi both how women may corrupt or negotiate the male gaze, and also how popular culture offers opportunities for women to gaze at female and male protagonists. Moreover, the psychoanalytic approach reduces everything to gender, neglecting other aspects of power such as yung class and race na pinag-usapan kanina, which affect patriarchal relations and which subsequent feminist theorizing has tried to take into consideration. So we now go to radical feminism. So according to Van Zunen, radical feminism views patriarchy as the most basic and universal structure of oppression, but conceives of masculinity and femininity as innate biological characteristics of men and women. So here, it argues that since mass media are in the hands of male owners and producers, they will operate to the benefit of patriarchal society. The power of the media to affect men's behavior towards women and women's perception of themselves is beyond discussion. So, binaliwala nila. Okay? While male owners and producers feast on operating to the benefit of patriarchal society, this is not the case to Shonda Rhimes, who is the female creator of the top hit American medical drama television, Grey's Anatomy. So the creator, Shonda Rhimes, has been outspoken about the importance of normalizing television. Rhimes has managed to represent the reality of women because she wants TV shows to represent real life and not just fictitious experiences of women in reality. And it's becoming more apparent every time she adds characters to be truly fearless, feminist, and also fierce na rin. They also need to be vulnerable at times and realistically flawed. So hindi yun tinatanggal sa show because no one is perfect all the time. So why would television characters be any different? Okay? So for someone who is watching the show, you can really see the transition ng representation of women in society based on this film. So the female protagonist, who is Meredith Grey, from being this dependent girl or dependent doctor to her husband, who is Dr. Shepard, she started to gain independence the time that her husband died. Okay, so it just goes to show that not everything mass media depict of women is true, and that female characters really are fearless and fierce. Okay, so radical feminism's discussion on media's role can be depicted also in pornography. So let us be open-minded about this topic, since some of its proponents regard this as the most graphic expression of the relation between patriarchy and popular culture. Pornography kasi, it propagates the existing gender inequality in the society, and it breeds sexual violence, as a result of which women end up becoming the victims of everything offensive that pornography depicts and stands for. Okay, so the most popular pornographic videos are loaded with scenes of physical violence and verbal abuse. Amid such this grim scenario for women, it becomes extremely important to examine this from a feminist lens. Okay?